Hi, I'm Ed. In this video series, I'm going to walk you through basic principles for interpreting the Work Styles Questionnaire Screening Report from CareProfiler. The 4 videos in this series include profile validity, target ranges, DayOne factors, and the screening index and DayOne index. In this video, we'll indeed be focusing on the screening index and the DayOne index. As you've already learned from the profile validity video, before looking at any information in the report, we need to ensure that we have a valid profile, and it looks like we do. So let's head to the final page of the report to get to the auto scoring aid. Here, you'll see that each applicant gets 2 overall scores, the screening index on top and the DayOne index just below that. Let's take a closer look at each of these scores, starting with the screening index. The screening index is giving you a measure of the applicant's potential for success in the specific position that they applied to. So, looking back at our report, we see that Sarah has a screening index of 698 for the caregiver position. Now, if Sarah were to apply for a housekeeper or office assistant position, her screening index would be different for each of these positions. Let's take a closer look at how the screening index is actually calculated. To calculate the screening index, the system looks at all of the work style traits of the applicant and then compares them to what is ideally needed in the specific job the person is applying to. All of those factors are calculated together, and the system gives you an overall screening index. Scores on the screening index range from 0 to 999. And in fact, the only way to actually get a 0 is if you produce an invalid profile. Scores can fall into 4 categories. Low potential for scores below 400, moderate potential for scores between 400 and 500, good potential for scores between 500 and 650, and high potential for scores above 650. Now, it would be nice if that one number were the whole story. It would be pretty easy to get it right, wouldn't it? But people aren't machines. They're people. People have unique motivations, interests, emotions, ideas of their own, and expectations. Managing is all about helping people unlock their potential by discovering and aligning these motivations, interests, and perspectives. Now, sometimes this is easier said than done. So to help you make the best decision possible, we've created the DayOne Index to give you insight into how much management investment someone is going to need. The other score on the last page of the screening report is the DayOne Index. The DayOne Index is a measure of how much effort and investment is going to be necessary from the manager to help this person realize their potential. To calculate the DayOne Index, the system is considering things like the strength of an applicant's personality, their flexibility and adaptability, and their fit with your culture. All of that combines to give you a general measure of how important effective management will be in determining the applicant's success. With regard to reading the DayOne Index, you should know that the lower the DayOne Index score, the more skilled and effective the supervisor will need to be in order for the new hire to realize his or her potential. Similar to the screening index, scores on the DayOne Index range from 0 to 999. And again, the only way to actually get a 0 is to produce an invalid profile. On the DayOne Index, scores can fall into 3 categories. Below 400 means that the individual requires a highly effective manager, very skilled in situational management. Between 400 and 500, the individual is going to need a fairly effective manager with some situational management skills. And then finally, scores above 500 indicate an individual who would benefit, as we all would, from a manager trained in situational management principles. Now that you have a better understanding of these two numbers, let's take a closer look at our example of Sarah. We can see that Sarah has a very strong screening index at 698 that puts her in the high potential category. However, with her low DayOne index of 435, she's going to require a manager who is fairly skilled in situational management and who is able to put in some significant amount of investment in helping her realize her potential. Now, there's one additional piece of information we can consider to help us in our decision-making process. I'm sure you recognize our scientists from other videos. Well, one of our analyses of a group of 5,000 employees from 8 different organizations managing a total of 48 healthcare facilities across the United States uncovered an important finding when the two indices are far apart. We found that if the difference between the screening index and the DayOne index is greater than 220 points, the employee is about 3 times more likely to be terminated. So why does this significant difference so often lead to termination? Well, imagine someone who has lots of potential but needs a really effective manager to draw out this potential. For example, let's meet Dave and Karen. Both have a high potential to succeed in their positions. However, Dave has a very strong personality, and Karen has some tightly held and specific work habits that she developed in her previous job. So what happens when people like Dave and Karen don't get the management help that they need during this adjustment? What happens when their focus shifts away from the goals you've set for them? Well, this causes frustration for everyone, the employee, the manager, coworkers, and yes, even residents, ultimately having a very negative impact on the organization to the point where someone likely needs to be terminated. Fortunately, there is hope, and if you hire someone with a 220-point difference, there still is a lot you can do to help things go right. Remember, we're all people, and we all want to do our best. Our Managing for Success video series tells you more about the tools we've built for helping get the most out of the staff you have. Don't forget to look for these videos, starring me, Ed, coming to you soon. There's a lot more to this management thing that we need to talk about. But for now, let's take a moment to review what we've learned about using the screening and DayOne indices. So the screening index is a measure of the applicant's potential. The DayOne index is a measure of how much management investment is going to be needed to help the applicant reach that potential. And remember, if the difference between the screening index and the DayOne index is greater than 220 points, that person has a pretty high likelihood of being turned over. And now hopefully you know a little bit more about the screening index and the DayOne index in the Work Styles Questionnaire screening report. Remember to refer back to the other videos in this series to get a thorough overview of how to get the most value out of the screening report. Thanks for joining me on this journey of this section of the report, and we'll see you in the next video.